Greetings and salutations. It is I, Mr. Nothing, the museum curator of the weird and the strange, and the host who might be a prized frog, of all things. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday. I had a book lined up, but it was called The Accomplished Guest by Ann Beattie. But it turns out that book was not that good, and I will explain why in my wrap-up video at the end of the month. But instead I threw in an audible and I decided to talk about a classic short story about frogs and being swindled by strangers. I am talking about The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County by Mark Twain. For those that don't know, and how would you not know who Mark Twain is? He's taught in high schools all around the country. But Mark Twain is he's an author from the 1800s. He wrote, about Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, two books that I've read before and I thought were pretty good. He also wrote a number of short stories and essays and nonfiction works about a variety of things. His real name was Samuel Clemens or something, but he wrote under a number of pen names, including Mark Twain. What's interesting about his life is that he lived between 1835 and 1910. So his birth and his passing were both marked by the arrival of Halley's Comet, which I think is a fascinating little bit of trivia about his life. The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County was published in the 1860s. It was one of the first things of his that got published. So this is some of his early work, whereas Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer were some of his later work. Got some experience under his belt before he wrote the Great American Novel or something like that. Anyways, without further ado, let's talk about The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. I'll do a little summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County begins with the narrator who is told by a friend to go talk to a man named Simon Wheeler about another man named Leonidas Smiley, the Reverend Leonidas Smiley. However, when he talks to this man, Simon Wheeler begins to talk about someone else entirely, Jim Smiley, who the narrator suspects was the goal all along, that his friend played a trick on him. Simon Wheeler talks about Jim Smiley and reveals that he loved to bet on everything, dog fight, cat fights, rooster fights, you name it. He placed a bet on it. He also interestingly placed a bet on, or tried to bet on his friend's wife dying, which I think is a little funny, but also a little dark. Smiley ended up getting a dog that he named Andrew Jackson, and the dog was pretty strong in a fight. However, eventually one day the dog died. Jim Smiley eventually managed to find a frog that he named Daniel Webster, that he trained to jump really high, and he bragged about it, and he used that frog to win a lot of bets, and it became a sort of celebrated jumping frog in the county, the title of the short story. And so he meets a stranger one day, and he tells the stranger about the frog, but the stranger's like, oh, that frog doesn't look very impressive. And so Smiley goes off to find a frog in the swamp so that he can bet against the stranger. And while he's away, the stranger takes advantage of this and fills his frog with quail shot, making it heavier than it would normally be. When Smiley gets back, they test out, or they try out the bet, and the stranger's frog ends up jumping higher. Daniel Webster ends up losing. So Smiley is sad at first about this, but he eventually realizes that the stranger loaded his frog with quail shot, and so the he goes to chase after the stranger, but the stranger is long gone by now. At this point, the guy who's telling the story, Simon Wheeler, excuses himself. The narrator kind of realizes that he's never going to learn about Leonidas Smiley. This was kind of a prank on his friend's part. And when Simon gets back, he tries to tell him about some other animal that Jim Smiley had. Unfortunately, the narrator can't stand it, and he tells him to just like go away, and he proceeds to leave. And that's where the story ends, on a bit of a funny note there. In terms of analysis, this story comes off a bit of a tall tale, a sort of an urban legend, because the story is like it's told by a guy who knows a guy that this happened to. So it's not exactly a first-hand experience. The narrator is getting a second-hand account of a kind of infamous man named Jim Smiley. Also, the narrator's friend told him to ask about Reverend Leonidas Smiley, and that man doesn't seem to exist. So it's a wonder if maybe Simon Wheeler is just some town drunk who rambles on about people who don't exist, figments of his imagination, and this is all put upon a story that hasn't actually happened. But it does read like a tall tale. A man who loves to bet, getting these outlandish animals to do strange things, such as a frog that jumps really high, and then getting swindled out of some money. Sort of a little morality there. I like that Mark Twain engaged in a little tall tale telling, sort of creating his own folklore to pass on to future generations, maybe. One of the smaller themes of this story is that of pride and greed, and how they're kind of harmful, and you will pay for falling victim to the pride and greed, because they are sins, sort of. Mark Twain shows us by having Jim Smiley be very interested in getting money. Like he's obsessed with betting and getting money, so he's a very greedy individual in that way, and he's also very prideful because he takes pride in these animals that he's training, and he's convinced that nothing can befall him. But pride does go before the fall, and a stranger ends up conning him out of $40, which is a significant sum for the time. So it's almost as if Twain is saying, he's doing a little morality there. He's saying if you're prideful and greedful, you will get your comeuppance in some sort of way. So I like how that's kind of layering the story too. Another thing I really like about this story is the classic Mark Twain sense of humor that follows it throughout. Given that this was one of the first things he published, he was forming the base of the humor that would follow his career. You see it in his other stories with in Tom Sawyer, him convincing his friends to paint the fence for him, and in Huck Finn you have these two strangers who try to convince everyone that they're the lost king of France, which I think is one of the funnier aspects of that story. In this story, you get that humor in unusual ways, and there's some quotes that I would like to read you. So, Parson Walker's wife laid very sick once, for a good while, and it seems as if they warned going to save her, but one morning he come in and Smiley asked how she was, and he said she was considerable better, thank the Lord for his infinite mercy, and coming on so smart that with the blessing of Providence, she'd get well yet. And Smiley, before he thought, says, well, I'll risk 2.5 that she don't anyway. And then there's another interesting quote that comes at the end. After Smiley loses the bet. And he says, Smiley, he stood scratching his head and looking down at Daniel for a long time. At last he says, I do wonder what in the nation that frog throwed off for. I wonder if there ain't something that matter with him. He appears to look mighty baggy somehow. And he catched Daniel by the nape of the neck and lifted him up and says, why, blame my cats if he don't weigh 5 pound, and turned him upside down, and he belched out a double handful of shot. And then he see how it was, and he was the maddest man. He set the frog down and took him out, that feller, but he never catched him. That's the traditional Mark Twain sense of humor, where you got a man who's making bets against whether or not a friend's wife is going to survive, which I just laughed when I read that, because it just seems so outlandish. And then when Smiley finally figures out that he's been swindled, he finds out in an unusual way, like, wait, my frog's not supposed to be this heavy. What happened? And it turns out that the stranger filled him full of quail shot, which is another very unusual way of going about things. I really like that aspect. And then I also like the ending where Jem tries to go on, or Simon tries to go on about another one of Jem's animals. And the narrator is like, oh, hang Smiley and his afflicted cow. I muttered good-naturedly, and bidding the old gentleman good day, I departed. And it's just like, he doesn't want to hear about any more of these animals. He knows that his friend has played a prank on him, and he's just tired of listening about this nonsense man that it's possible Simon Wheeler just invented. So I enjoyed that. And so that was The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, and my thoughts on it. A very funny and pretty good story. I like that it's one of Mark Twain's first. I enjoyed getting to see some of his early work, and I would be interested in seeing some of his later work as well, outside of Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, just because I've never really read anything outside of that from Mark Twain. So maybe down the road I will visit that. I definitely recommend it for you out there. It's a bite-sized short story, and I feel that most people will enjoy it. I'll put a link to it in the description because it is in the public domain. That is my gift to you, folks. Otherwise, don't forget to comment below if you have some thoughts on this story, or if you read it and you want to share your own thoughts, or you want to comment on my review. I would love to hear from you. Let's have a discussion about this interesting short story. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that we can talk more about Mark Twain in the future and get Mark Twain out to the masses. And in the meantime, I wish you the best of luck in your weird travels. Don't get swindled by strangers.